Hello and welcome to the Jungle Brothers podcast. I am your host, Joey, and today my voice is extra raspy because I'm dealing with a cold. Now, this is not just any ordinary cold. This is worse than any cold you've ever had or anyone on this earth has ever had. And I want to let you know that I'm still getting it done. I am medicated, I am caffeinated, I'm working from home, and things are looking bright at 11:28 in the morning. Now, today's chat this is from around a week ago, and this was with my physiotherapist, an excellent guy named Nick Batcher. Now, Nick has been my physio for many years, and I consider him a very valuable ally in my life. Now, for someone who's training, and whether you're training in a contact sport or you're training in the gym or you're doing your thing, whatever it is, you're going to need someone that can work on your body. And Nick, for me, has always been someone that I trust, and I will turn to him when I do inevitably get those small injuries. Even when I've had larger injuries like my knee reconstruction, Nick was the first guy that I spoke to. Now, Nick is a physiotherapist. However, in the context of today's chat, I want you to think of, I don't want you to think so much of the particular discipline, i.e. physiotherapy, as so much the thing, because what I've learned over the years, and I guess what we try and hopefully what one of the takeaways from listening to today's chat is that it's not so much about the particular discipline that this therapist represents. So physiotherapy is great, but I've also had great osteopaths, great chiropractors, great myofascial workers, ART practitioners. And really, it's not so much about what it is that they're doing in terms of their official qualifications, but it's more the approach that they take, the perspectives that they have, and their life experience and how they translate that to their assessment and treatment of you. And so something that we push a lot is that you need someone like a Nick in your life, because whether you are competing in sports or you're just training in the gym, or even if you're not really doing that much training, actually, you are going to get injured. Small injuries are a fact of life. We are constantly dealing with little things that pop up. And so when you have an ally like Nick on your side, that is the person that you can turn to help remedy those things. Now, hopefully they're not big injuries. Hopefully they're just little ones. But in any case, you want to have a team or at least a partner there that you can turn to for help in those moments. So we sort of dive into that relationship today with Nick. We talk about his background as a rugby union player and how that has, I suppose, enriched his approach to physiotherapy. And for me as a jiu-jitsu guy, that is really important because he understands training and having a love of a very physical sport. But we also go into some of the common things that you might have heard from your practitioner or therapist about your body and things that can perhaps scar you in a bad way. We're talking about inactive glutes. We're talking about an underactive core. We're talking about excessive hip rotation or hip tilt. Little things that sort of get thrown around in the health space a little bit and that can end up having you think about your body in a particular way. And oftentimes they're just a bit of a throwaway comment that a health practitioner might make because one, maybe they don't know what the issue is, or two, maybe they're just a little bit misguided in their judgment at that time. So really cool chat, very important. I hope you enjoy it. And hey, while we're here, before we get into the episode, please help to support the show. If you could share this episode with a friend who you know would like it, or if you could take a screenshot of it and post it on your Instagram, or you can leave us a review on whichever platform you're listening to. Any of those three things go a really long way to helping to support what we do. And that's awesome because one, it means that I can keep having these awesome chats and putting this show out for you. But two, it also means that we can keep getting awesome people like Nick to come and chat with me. So thank you. Please enjoy today's episode. Let's go. Mate, tell me about when you started as a physio. We were just talking about off air, we were talking about how personal trainers and you know, physios and whatnot, the people in this kind of realm like to use the big words. What were like some of the things that you were doing back then to try and flex your newfound knowledge? Because I'm guessing when you come out of college or whatever, you're still pretty green.
Oh yeah, super green. Like I think like as a physio, when you look back on it like 5 years into it, you're like, ooh, I don't know if I should have been doing that. Like you're never doing something like really bad, but you're like, I probably didn't like break down that client the way I should have, if that makes sense. And I reckon like the biggest like flex, as you put it, that you sort of do is like you just use the terms, right? You use big terms, or you overanalyze something. You try to make something that should be just as simple, like, hey, we've just got to load your knee up, into 15 different sort of exercises to load your knee up. It's like, hey, actually you might just get away with just squatting, or like putting some elevation in your heels and just squatting down, whereas I might get you to do 15 different variations of that squat to actually sort of go, hey, listen, I'm adding value to you. Like I've got all these tools in my toolbox, whereas sometimes you just need one tool rather than the 55 tools, if that makes sense.
Dude, that's the exact same thing that PTs do. Like, I still have those programs on my computer, I'm sure, because they were always in an epic spreadsheet that was like I spent way too much time on. But it's all of the exercises all of the time, and it's the tempos, and it's the very specific rest periods and all that, when what you said initially was we just need to load your legs up a bit. Like it can be achieved in a much more simple manner.
100%. And like, yeah, I think it comes from not like, I think it's your desire to add value to them, right? Because as a PT, as a physio, right, it's a cost to come to us, right? Like for us anyway, it's like $90 to come for a session. If you come to that session and I give you some advice, which is really important, you might not perceive that as the most important thing, even though it probably is. You see the value in like me giving you an exercise. It's like, okay, Nick gave me, again, I'll just use a squat. Like now, like I've already been doing the squat for the last week. Like what's my next progression? It's like, actually sometimes if it's only been a week, you only get to squat. But then for them, it's like, what's the value in coming here? Because like I've stayed on the same progression, if that makes sense. So as a newbie, you go, all right, well, okay, we gave them a squat last week. We've got to give them something new. They need something new. Otherwise, they're not going to come back next week because, why would they come back just to get the same exercise again and again and again? Whereas sometimes it might be, hey, listen, you're only going to do the squat for this week. Come back in 3 weeks' time. That's when we can actually progress you. So I think it's the desire to add value most of the time for people. I'm sure there's, some other PTs and physios out there that also, maybe don't know what sort of the next progression is, and especially that happens as you're younger. But I think hopefully it comes from a good heart most of the time when the PTs and personal trainers and whatever exercise physiologists are all doing that as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. It would always come from the right place generally. Yeah. I feel like there is a global kind of thing that you hear coaches and stuff talking about, and when I say coaches, that's include everyone. Yeah, everyone. That as you get deeper into the job, your programs and your method, it just gets simpler and simpler.
Oh,
because I think we all do that. We like overcompensate in the beginning, and then as you become more knowledgeable and more confident, you're like, actually, we only need like 3 exercises. Yeah. And a couple warm up and we're good kind of thing. It's just, it's funny because it's a little bit disappointing too, because you're like, fuck, I wish I knew that back then.
Yeah, I think that goes for all like training, physio, whatever you want to sort of put it together, because I think as time goes on, physios and PTs and exercise physiologists and chiros, like we're sort of all melding towards the sort of one direction where it's like, it should be for a physio anyway. Yeah, maybe you need a little bit of soft tissue work, but ultimately you've probably got to guide them through some sort of exercise strengthening based or mobility based program.
Yeah.
So I think that's all like converging that way. And so as a result, like the exercises are all sort of like converging, and sort of as you get understanding more, you realize, okay, yeah, it is just simplicity that we need rather than sort of being overcomplicated with things, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I definitely agree with that.
What about, so a bit of context for folks, you're my physio. Yeah. I've been seeing you for, I don't know, it's been like, when did you first come here?
I reckon it's 5 years. Let's put it around 5 years. We started.
Did you come to the old gym, or was it this gym?
Yeah, we came to the old gym. So like that would have
probably,
been.
This has probably been 6 or 7.
Yeah, I reckon that would have been around 2016.
Okay.
Give or take. So yeah, COVID years, maybe 6 years, right?
Yep. So I've been coming to see you since then. Do me a favor, bring the mic a bit closer to your head. Yeah. The one thing that I feel is very that I really like about your approach to fixing me. Yeah, so I'm only coming to you when I'm busted up. Yeah. Let's be honest.
That's the way it should be, though, right?
Well, yeah, I suppose so. Yeah. Is it, or is there a thing of like, hey, if we stay ahead of this?
Just like I reckon you don't necessarily need to come to a physio to do that, right? Like you can do that with a personal trainer too, right?
It's true.
It's kind of like your bulletproof stuff. Like it is not going to guarantee you're not going to get injured in jits, but if you do it, does it make you a little bit more resilient? Got a bit more capacity to tolerate it? 100%. If you came to us and like, you know, you're like, oh, I'm just about to start a running program. Is there anything that I can do to sort of get myself ready? 100%. Like, let's have a look and see if you've got good calf endurance, for an example. And if you've like got no calf endurance, maybe you're going to be more susceptible to an Achilles issue. So you can definitely do prehab. I don't think it's 100% necessary, but there's no harm in it that way. And like, hopefully as a physio, like if you do come in and we do that and we do the assessment, it's like, you're good to go. Like, no exercise needed. Jog on, so to speak.
Jog on. Yeah, it makes sense. But so on that, one of the things I really like about your approach is that it's very training based.
Yeah.
So it's always like, oh yeah, here's the treatment that we're going to do today. But then, hey, let's get out on the floor and here are the exercises that you're going to run with for the next, whatever period of time. And it's always, then you send it through and it's always pretty considerable. It's like, fuck, he wants me to do like these 6 or 7 different things.
Yeah.
It's a program essentially.
Yeah.
And you train, obviously. You guys can't see, but great pipes on the man. They don't come from massaging folks. Yeah. But so here's my question for you is, how do you view, and we don't need to call anyone out or say names, but how do you view physios and chiros and stuff who don't train? Who don't partake in physical activity of some kind?
I think you're definitely able to do it, right? Like, there's no doubt you don't have to be, physically fit to be a physiotherapist. You can still get an understanding that, of like how the injuries would be coming apart, what the athlete needs to do or person to get better, right? Like, again, to use like a calf or an Achilles issue, right? Like, really common like Achilles tendonitis or tendinopathy issue will be like, hasn't been running for how long, ever long, decides he wants to do a marathon, starts running, starts to get Achilles pain, warms up into it, but then it's really sore the next morning. Like, he'll understand that sort of process because he's read it in the books and everything like that. But I think there's an added benefit to injuries when you've like been through them. So that might not necessarily be from training, but it might just be from, you being a weekend warrior and then doing the exact same thing and going, oh, I've got a bit of an Achilles issue here. So you get an understanding of the injury. And then in terms of like training and then, being a physio in general, I think it just helps, right? Because like when you train, everyone picks up little niggles, right? Like, everyone always jokes when you're a physio, like, oh, you must never be injured. Like, the reality is, yeah, we've still got an ego. I'm still going to get injured. I still want to get some ridiculous bench number that there's no reason or rhyme for me to get. Like, I'm just getting it purely for my ego. And then my shoulder will be like, oh, shoulder's a bit tight today, but I did have to hit 120 on the bench today, so I'm going to hit it no matter what. So, like, we still have those processes. And, like, so you still go through them and you still pick up a niggle, but then you realise, I know why that happened. You sort of get an understanding of the injury, you rehab it yourself, and you get like just an idea on how it sort of how the rehab might progress and how you might get benefited from certain techniques, whether it be like a massage, whether it be just doing like some banded work, or whether it might be rest as a whole. So I think you get an added layer of understanding of the injuries if you have either had an injury or if you train regularly as well. So I've been pretty, I say, unlucky in my lack thereof a footy career that I've had sort of like 4 or 5 surgeries. And I think I'm better at understanding people's knees because I went through a really big traumatic knee injury myself that took a good sort of like year to get better in terms of like my quad tendon and stuff like that. So I think as a benefit for that for me now is I understand like the process. And because I actually did a really crappy rehab job at the start, I was like just a new physio and stuff like that. So I was really focusing on the career. Exercise sort of fell by the wayside. Like, I always trained, but I just sort of like neglected doing some running, neglected doing like the knee extensions I needed to do to get my sort of knee better. And as a result, like I had this like chronic sort of like tendonitis in my tendon for probably like 6 months and just never really addressed it, like hurt going up the stairs, like classic sort of like symptoms and everything like that. And then I sort of realized, I got to hold on here. I got to actually sort of try to fix this. And it's quite a long slog when you sort of let it go, so to speak. And so going through that long slog where it probably took me a good like 6 months to get back to feeling, up to 90, 95%, now makes it easier for me to chat to, say, if you do your knee and go, hey, listen, man, like I know the knee's still sore. Like it's going to be sore for another 3 months. I understand it. I've been through it. And I think it really helps that way. So I don't think you necessarily need it, but it's an added layer, I think might be the best way to put it.
Yeah, so I agree. Like when you present it like that, I think it's you don't have to be in the trenches to be able to help people who are.
Yeah.
Right. But I ruminate on that, and I think about this all the time because in jiu-jitsu I'm constantly dealing with it. You know, we get a lot of people getting in touch now, like, oh, I've done this. What do you think I should do? And it's always like, have you, do you have a good physio and have you been to see them? Oh, I went to see one, but I don't know if they're that good. I'm like, well, do they know what you do? Like, do they understand jiu-jitsu? Do they strengthen? And they're like, oh, nah, like they think it's like karate or whatever. And you're like, dude, that's tough because it's like pretty gnarly sport. And they don't quite get it. They probably think you're doing like forms and maybe some taekwondo shit. And it's like, but going back to my original point is that when I go through all that, I'm like, it really, as much as I agree that the people don't have to be in the trenches as well, I come back around to it's worth so much when they are that I almost see it as a prerequisite now. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to get treated by someone who isn't working on their own physicality. They don't have to be doing the same shit as me.
Yeah.
But someone that's going through a training, a physical development process on a regular basis, because they're just not going to get certain, even cultural things. Like, well, why did you go for the 120 when you know you've got a bad shoulder? You're like, because motherfucker, it's 120. I only did 117 last week.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, that. You're like, Joey, look, I know why you fucking lifted the sandbag. But I told you.
But then I think it comes down to like your personal preference too, right? Like, because if I'm everyday Joe, wrong use of the name, right?
Not on this show.
Like, if I'm everyday John, so to speak, and like I don't really care that much for training, then I might not see that as perceived value, right? And I'd rather have the guy that
because you're a Poindexter.
Yeah, but that might be the case, right? We've got to take care of these Poindexters too. But no, like. I definitely think, and jiu-jitsu is a great example of it, right? Like, because jiu-jitsu is like that classic case, and we see it all the time when someone comes in to see us and they've been like, I've been to see a physio, they told me just to stop jiu-jitsu. And it's like, that's not the answer, right? Or the doctor's an even better one, right? Like someone goes in there, they've banged up their knee, they go to see the local GP and he's like, so how'd you do it, right?
Arnica.
Yeah. I did it during jiu-jitsu. It's like, why are you doing jiu-jitsu? It's like, I like it. It's like, well, you should just stop it. It's like going to cause you too many injuries. It's like, that's not the answer. And I think you've got to get an understanding and you've got to, so like I treat a lot of, obviously some jiu-jitsu guys, you've sent them my way. Adam, who I'm sure has probably been on the show. Has,
multiple times.
Has sent a couple of his people my way. But I've never trained jiu-jitsu. But then I've actually sort of tried myself at least to go and get an understanding. So if I'm chatting to someone and they're telling me like, I've got a bit of a bung shoulder, I think this was actually you the other day, and someone had me in a Kimura, and then like, if I didn't know what a Kimura was, I need to go, what is that? Like, what is a Kimura? I can't just like gloss over that and go, okay, he's in a Kimura, like, and think he's, essentially pushing his arm out in front of him when it's the opposite, where he's getting his arm wrenched behind him, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I think you need to, in that aspect, even if I don't partake in jiu-jitsu, I've got to get a level of understanding with it if I'm going to be able to treat them. And so like knees are probably the most common thing I reckon in jiu-jitsu. So we obviously see a lot of knees. And so we'll often get people in their rehab doing some things that might necessarily not be for your knee. So like a common one is like you get like a lateral knee injury, okay? So outside of your knee gets sort of stretched during jiu-jitsu. And so that's a really common injury. And like the rehab for that is a little bit of rest and just release some muscles around there. You got to basically wait for it to settle down a little bit in most cases if it's like a minor strain of that sort of lateral ligament. But then what you need to do is then expose that person back into the movement, right? And that's probably things people don't do when they're thinking about rehab for like a knee like that if they're not doing jiu-jitsu, right? Like if a rugby player is coming in, I don't need to really sort of force him into what's called that varus force, where you're sort of pushing the knee out, like trying to essentially push if you sort of had your legs crossed, pull one leg in and push your knee out the opposite way. But I'll often give them that sort of classic glute stretch. If you sort of lie on your back, cross one leg over the top of it, and just get you used to pushing your knee back and forth. And that's just about a graded exposure to the movement, so your knee gets used to it, and also to get their confidence back up there. But by no means is that a knee stretch, is it a knee exercise? It's purely a glute stretch. It only stretches your glute. But that's sort of, from my understanding of jiu-jitsu and getting into a guard, you're often going to be in that position. Yeah. So we've got to get you strong in that position. It's kind of like what the crux of your BJJ bulletproof is, right? Like,
absolutely.
So I think, again, to sort of go back to the question about do you have to be a, exercise, like partake in the exercise. I don't think you necessarily do, but again, like you've got to at least understand it. Like if you don't have the understanding, I think that's like you'll be shooting yourself in the foot. And I think the other thing that you mentioned, which is a little bit side bridge, the cultural thing also is a big important part of it. Like in terms of like a physio as well, like chatting to a jiu-jitsu guy, like if you just tell them, hey, listen, you've just got to rest for the next 6 weeks. See ya, we're going to the next physio, right? Like the reality is there's got to be like a bit of a give and take in terms of for physios anyway. And that's that culture of like most of the time, if they're sort of, especially if they're sort of in those higher belts, you guys are animals / you just love doing it and you're not going to stop pretty much unless something rips or tears like completely off. So you've got to at least like guide them through it and say, okay, hey, you can't play guard for the next little bit, but play the top game and practice in that. So like you give them something that goes, oh, cool, I can just work on that for a little bit of time or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's huge. I think when I think about you and like I think you come from a rugby background, right? Which we'll get into shortly, but I think that really pays dividends for a jiu-jitsu player. Yeah. Because in a way, there's a lot of similarities between, where it's like highly physical. Yeah. You're getting hit from whatever angle. There's shit going on that you cannot predict.
Being injured as well, right?
Yeah, and you also like you have that grit where it's like I'm fucking going for it. Like I'm chasing the ball. Yeah. I'm not thinking about my positioning or my social. It's task driven. Yeah. Which is arguably any sport. Yeah. And jiu-jitsu is the same. It's like maybe you show up to training with a few injuries and stuff, but then you warm up. Then it's like, hey guys, we're rolling now, and then you're like, I'm going to war. Yeah. So I think that really pays dividends in terms of you being able to relate to grapplers. Yeah. For like maybe if you played soccer, maybe not quite as much. Yeah. Like soccer's still very physical, but much less contact and in a different way, right?
Yeah, it is definitely like it's an added advantage down that path for like jiu-jitsu guys. There's no doubt, like when you chat to people and they go, oh, you play rugby? They're interested in that. So then they can sort of relate to you first, which is also a really important thing in physio. You've got to be able to relate to the person. Like if you're sitting in there and it feels like you're pulling teeth, they're probably actually not going to take in as much or, think you're as competent as much. So there's this weird element in physio as well, where if you don't have that like cultural bond or something like that, even if you're the world's best physio, sort of exactly what they need to do, it might be in one ear, out the other for the other person. So you've also got to develop that bond. I guess it's the same as like PT as well, right? Like, a lot of the time when you're sort of deep into the PT and you might have been seeing this person for 2 years, they're nearly like a friend and you sort of keep going to them because you necessarily need like the progressions or something. You just want someone that holds you accountable and someone that not necessarily to chat to, but just be there and enjoy your workouts with to a certain degree as well. So you need that sort of connection, I think, to really get across what people, to get people better essentially. Like you don't 100% need it, but boy, does it help. It's like for us as well, like when we do a lot of like surgeries, who do your surgery, Dr. Bro, like he sends a lot of people our way if they don't have a physio and they live around us, they'll sort of, he'll go, hey, these guys I've done some work with, they're semi-decent. I'm sure he says something like that. But coming from him, like when a surgeon sends you to a physio, you sort of like, they already think you're the bee's knees and they'll listen to you more, if that makes sense. For. Yeah, exactly. You've been vouched for. So I think like, again,
a friend of ours.
Yeah, exactly. A friend of ours. And like, also like this guy's like decent enough. I do the surgery, he looks after you. And then like, there's less that sort of, not selling, but there is a part of selling in physio, but you don't have to sell as much / get that bond as much because they're going to go, okay, I'll listen to this guy because he knows what he's talking about already, if that makes sense.
Yeah. 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 That goes a long way. It's funny on that, like, something like, so kind of what we're sort of discussing in a roundabout way is some of the disconnect that can exist between client, physio, obviously client trainer, client doctor, but then also like between the professions, like between a physio and like say that if I need to send someone out, there's a couple of people I might send them to, but depending on what they're dealing with, I'm going to be very specific about it. I'm going to feel very confident sending someone to you because I'm like, Nick speaks my language, he speaks our language, go see him, right? But the surgery one's really interesting. I remember Dr. Pro obviously did my surgery. He was great. But I remember there was and I think I told you this story. Yeah. It's worth mentioning again though. There's another preeminent big knee guy in Sydney, and my partner's brother injured his knee like skiing, I think.
Yeah.
And he doesn't do, as far as I know, he doesn't do any kind of training.
Yeah.
He's just a slim guy and is, naturally in pretty good shape and goes skiing a couple times a year. And he injured his knee and he's like, this thing's really sore, and it was dragging on for a little while. And he went to see the surgeon. First thing he did was, I guess he got a referral from the doctor, and then he went to see the surgeon. And he's like, what's up? And the surgeon's like, oh, there's, maybe, I guess they did a scan or whatever. And he's like, yeah, there's a little bit of something here, irritation or a small tear or something. And he's like, it's not that bad. Like you don't need surgery. And he's like, okay. And he asked him, he asked the surgeon, should I do physio? And the surgeon said, no, physio's not going to help. And he was like, okay. And then, we were talking to him and he's like, oh, well, he said, and I asked him, should I do physio? And he said, no, it's not going to help. I'm like, the fuck? Like, you don't do anything. Like, even if a physio just gives you bodyweight squats, like 3 sets of 10, a couple,
help, right?
Like, I'm like, that's so fucking irresponsible. Like for that surgeon to just be like absolutely no view of the ongoing physical development and how that might help to maybe not even fix that injury, but prevent future ones.
Oh, 100%. Like we've had issues with that, like in the past with like surgeons as well, where someone will get an actual surgery and they'll be like, don't bother about doing physio afterwards. And like, depending on like the injury, there might be not like a whole lot of benefit. Like we won't definitely be able to change it. Like a meniscus is a common one, right? Like not that they don't often say don't do surgery after a meniscus, but say if you have a meniscus tear, as a physio, I'm not going to be able to treat your meniscus tear. The surgeon's right? Like I can't fix that meniscus tear. It doesn't have a great blood supply, so it's going to stay torn. But what we can do is get you stronger calves, stronger quads, stronger hamstrings, get you looser around that knee, talk to you about things that might irritate it, how to avoid those things, and get you strong in like weird and wonderful positions so you sort of knees used to that load. And that's how we can help. And I think sometimes, surgeons like think, of course they're not going to be able to help. They can't like cut him open and like fix that problem.
I fixed it.
Yeah. And then so they'll sort of like with your brother-in-law, I think you said like his case is like, sure, we can't fix it. And then like the post-surgery cases, like when they go, oh, again, like I've already fixed it. You don't need physio. It's like, I think everyone can benefit from doing some strengthening, right? Like, sure, again, we might not make that 100% better, but if we can make his quality of life 5% better, it depends on how much he values that quality of life. Like that's important, right? Like I had someone actually in this morning and we're running through some tests and everything like that. And like one test was like a calf raise. Had to get out 30 calf raises, 30 single leg calf raises. There's a study on it basically saying that if you've got that, you've got good calf endurance. It's not going to be that's contributing to your injury anyway. So did the 30 calf raises. He got them out. Like afterwards, he's like, "Phew, geez, that was a killer. Like my calves are burning." It's like I'd expect it to. You just did 30 calf raises. So he's like, so I never have to like strengthen my calves again. It's like, well, you can always strengthen your calves. Like just because you can do 30 doesn't mean you can't do 60 and your calves are even stronger, right? Like I'm just not going to give you this as an exercise, but like, you're strong enough in terms of what we want to achieve. But he was like, so should I just not do them? And I was like, it's up to you in all honesty, right? Like it depends like what you want to achieve. If you want to get stronger calves, you should do more. If you want to do like marathons, maybe there is some good evidence to do some more calf raises and stuff. And they were a runner and stuff like that. So I think it comes down to what you want to achieve in terms of what you want to get out of it, right? Like, and if that back to the surgery is I want to improve my quality of life 10%, maybe by doing, as you said, 3 sets of 10 squats is going to improve your quality of life because you're going to get stronger legs and you're going to be a little bit better for it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the kind of the fundamental difference there that I see is that they're just like, with your example of the meniscus is like, the surgeon fixed the meniscus, like that's a really narrow view of that like isolated piece of the body.
Yeah.
But like everything works together. Yeah. And so let's say you're recovering from a meniscus issue and you're not moving very well.
Yeah.
Well, your hips are going to have some issues because of that, and your ankles are going to get a bit tight, and you're going to lose muscle mass in the leg. So doing other shit is going to help you to like maintain a bit of mass and keep motion and stay lubricated and all those things. It's just such a it's such an isolated view, which these days it seems so archaic,
touch, right?
Yeah, it's like
100%.
Everyone knows this shit. Like moving helps.
But I think also like the scary thing is, right, like you're in this world, I'm in this world. Like I love to train, like I try to fix people, you know, sort of every day, so to speak. You love to train, you're helping people every day. So you forget, though, how much people don't know out there too, right? So if your brother-in-law like didn't sort of understand and like has no sort of training background, he's just like, well, that's it. Like that's my knee's just going to be this good. Like, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it because that's what the surgeon told me. But like, it's absolutely crazy sometimes when we're treating some people. Like I might say as simple as like, hey, just show me how you squat, and you watch them squat, and you're like, I actually don't know how you function in life. Like, yeah, I'm thinking in my head that, like, in the nicest popular way, like, just because they're not that way inclined athletically, but then they just don't know how to move. It's not that they don't know what a squat is. Everyone sort of knows, like, what a squat is. Like, they've seen enough things that just, or understand that someone said squat at some stage.
Hopefully, yeah.
But, like, you just see them move, and it's like, your movement patterns are just so, like, far out. Like, how do you think, like, how do you get down and sit on the toilet, like, normally? Because if you can't move in those directions. So I think being in sort of the bubble that we are, we forget that people don't know that much, and we don't realize how much power we have. So going back to the surgeon, like him saying you don't need physio is probably saying to that person as well, you don't need to do any strength training, you don't need to do any personal training, you don't need to do any exercise. Your knee is where your knee's going to be. Just deal with it in life. Whereas, as you said, it's sort of so archaic and like so old school to say that. Like, you need to sort of probably say to him, like, yeah, like the physio is not going to be able to sort of fix your meniscus if we keep using that as the example, but they might be able to give you some exercises that strengthen up, as you say, the hips that have now sort of that have been a little bit tight, or that quad now that's lost 20% of its mass because you haven't been using your leg and stuff like that. So, as you say, archaic, but like it's also hard to change people's opinion. And like, if you are a surgeon, you've been in the game for 50 years and stuff like that, you're sort of based off probably a little bit of the older stuff. Just like I'm sure there'll be a part, and like we try not to as physios, like that nearly time will start passing me by and it's hard to keep up with sort of all the new stuff. Like, you hope that doesn't become you don't become like the dinosaur, so to speak.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm sure like every profession has it, right? Like, if you're an accountant, I'm sure like you start missing out on how to cook the books even better, so to speak.
I need a new accountant.
Yeah?
Mine doesn't cook the books at all.
Yeah, well, mine's all right, but I won't say who he is. All the cooking of the books.
Yeah, it's a good point. And I mean that the information that's given to people by any of those roles, by physio, by personal trainer, by surgeon, it's powerful information.
Yeah.
Like, it really influences them a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm dumbfounded sometimes that, the conversations I might have with someone in a PT session, and we'll end up talking about something that I'm so not qualified to fucking talk on.
Yeah.
But they're like, what do you think? And I'm like, I think you should divorce them. Like right away, but like you end up like, and you can see that people are like, because they're like, well, you've got it together. Like, what do you reckon? And it's like, you came to me because I've got it together from a training perspective.
Marital advice is not my.
That's right. I think it's personal trainers are classically sort of like teased for that, where they're like, I saw a thing the other day where it was like classic things that personal trainers say, and one of them was, "I'm not a nutrition coach, but."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Definitely.
But same shit. Like when the surgeon says that guy can go, oh, I don't need any of that stuff ever, and he can carry that belief. Forever.
100%. Like the belief thing is amazing, right? Like, again, to use examples for like work for me and stuff like that. Like, there's been plenty of times where like I've treated someone and they've had like a back injury or something like that, and they're like, yeah, so my disc is slipped. The last physio or the thing told me that. It's like, well, that's not true. Like, your disc can't slip. So like, that is just like, because it's such like a term that's been used for so long. And I think sometimes as physios, we fall back on those like terms, like where you sort of say something like nearly like a disc is slipped, and you're like, oh, I can't say that, because that gives out like negative connotations. Like, if my disc is slipped, never getting better. Like, a back injury is a classic one. Like, when people have had back injuries or back pain, let's call it, for 5-10 years, it's so hard to change those beliefs because they've been indoctrinated them for the last 10 years. Like, if you want to change something you've been doing for 10 years, like, it's hard to do, right? Like, so I think like we've got to really watch out on like terminology as like physios and also as like trainers. But yeah, quite often like to those beliefs are so hard to change, and like people can get really stuffed up on just being told like the wrong information. Like it amazes me that still some people come to me and they're like, oh, I saw my doctor and he told me to just have bed rest for my back. It's like, that is like so long ago that is. But in like doctors' defense, like I actually read a crazy stat the other day that it takes about 17 years for a new treatment to be considered, like to go through all the research and evidence on and prove that it is like research and evidence-based a best practice. So 17 years, like, you know, what are we now? We're 2022.
Yeah.
So that's like 2005, right? Like, is that right? My math's good there?
Yeah, no, I think so. Yeah, no, it is.
2005, right? So someone in 2005 just goes, I think knee extensions are okay for an ACL reconstruction. It's not till now, 17 years later, that we can actually say with evidence, this is what we need to do. Which is also like a really weird part in physio where you want to stay on top of it, and we sort of talked about not being a dinosaur and stuff like that. But if you only stick to the evidence base, like whatever's best evidence base, you potentially are missing out on some things that are going to benefit you, right? Like,
yeah.
And so you've got to take sort of anecdotal evidence within reason, like use your common sense meter, you know, the old sort of does it pass the pub test sort of thing, and go, okay, that will be hopefully beneficial. Like for...
What's the pub test again?
Pub test, if we're sitting around the pub and I say, you know, I think jumping's bad for your knees. Like if everyone agrees that jumping's bad for the knees, it passes the pub test because everyone's like, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
If you go, jumping's bad for the knees, and everyone goes, oh, I don't know about that. Like that seems a bit ridiculous. A lot of people jump and don't get bad knees. Then it's failed the pub test.
Okay.
Because like common sense tells us, no, let's question what that person says.
Yeah.
Hopefully that was a good example. But
so on that, that's a really interesting point about the evidence-based piece versus the anecdotal stuff.
Yeah.
And like I know there's a lot of people out there that really pride themselves on I only follow evidence-based stuff. And so what you're saying is like, well, that's great, but if you only follow that, you're holding yourself back potentially because there's this 17-year lag between
100%.
something getting tested and a paper being, you know, whatever, a meta study being released on it. But in that regard then, say as using a doctor as an example, do they have an obligation to only follow evidence-based stuff, or is it considered professional for them also to fall back on some of their opinions or their own personal experiences or anecdotal evidence?
I don't know as a doctor. Like, I reckon it's over my pay grade understanding that, because like I guess a doctor's not going to be able to go, oh, try this drug. There's no real evidence towards it yet, but we'll give it a shot. Like I think on those extremes it might be like a little bit too much. But if it's like something like a general advice, I'm sure they're allowed to offer their sort of opinion on the matter within reason. I'm sure they just have to frame it that way as well, if that makes sense. But
what about for you as a physio then?
For me as a physio, I definitely do things that might not have full 100% evidence. Like a classic example is like massage, right? Like if you look at all the studies and literature on massage, like it doesn't have any sort of major benefit. So no like clear, like, if you massage the quad when the knee is sore, it will be better, alrighty? But anecdotally, I've definitely seen where I might be treating someone, we get them to do a squat. It's like, my knee pain's 5 out of 10. And then you massage their quad, and then my knee pain's 3 out of 10. Whether that's some sort of psychological effect, or some sort of physiological effect, who knows? But it makes them feel better. And sometimes you need to make people feel better too. So I will do that as a form of treatment that will be, not really that evidence-based, but it's a part of it. And then like I'll add in, okay, we know that if we strengthen your quads, your knee's going to get better. So then there's evidence awards with it too.
Yeah.
I heard your podcast the other week with Justin Lang, and he was talking about doing some like agility stuff and everything like that post ACL. Super important, what we think is super important, but also well within that sort of 17-year like sort of marker. Like we weren't doing that with ACLs 10, 15 years ago. So it's all sort of new stuff, but it makes sense, right? It passes the pub test. If you want to play rugby after you injure your knee, you should be able to sidestep. And we should probably train you sidestepping, like whether it be like a lateral hop or just a bound forwards or zigzag hops. We should train you in that way to sort of only go on like our data and sort of like the evidence would be like, okay, as long as we've got symmetry, as long as we've got symmetry in size, strength, and a couple other little markers, you should be fine. But it kind of doesn't like compute that you then wouldn't sort of do sort of zigzag running or something like that before you get back into rugby, if that makes sense. So I think you've got to have this juggling act where you do some predominantly evidence-based, but then you've also got to maybe sprinkle in some things that make sense and that are specific to the person as well, because the hardest thing on all these studies is, right, like, they're not studying you, right? Like, rarely will someone that's
They fucking should.
Yeah, maybe they should. Rarely will they study someone that's like probably super keen, because you're not going to sign up to do one of these studies, right?
No.
Like, if they're like, Joey, come in here after your ACL, we're going to get you only to do 3 sets of 10 leg extension because we want to see if that helps your knee. You're going to be like, I'm going to do 15 other things as well because I want my knee to be better, right? So they've got to test it in isolation to sort of make sure the study's good and like make sure the study's sort of valid and everything like that. But like, so they're testing it on, again, average Johns that might be different to you. So if you're doing knee extensions only, yeah, sure, it might make your knee better. But if you're doing knee extensions, squats, deadlifts, and everything else included, maybe that makes your knee better than better, if that makes sense. So I think that's always the hard thing with like studies as well. Like, they're always tough like that. But I think you got to have a mixture of evidence-based and non-evidence-based, but the non-evidence-based has got to make sense, right? Like, if you're doing something weird and wonderful, like, you know, your day 2 of a ACL reconstruction, you're like, well, I'm going to get you jumping around and hopping on it. It's like, that's dangerous. Like, that doesn't pass the
that
pub
evidence
test.
we can rely on.
Yeah. And like, I think for physios, again, because I'm in the world, so you see on like Instagram and all these other things, right? You see the extremes of all these things. So you see, as you said, like the practitioners that base themselves only on evidence. I only want to do evidence-based stuff, and that's all I'm going to sort of center around. If you are doing massage, you're robbing that person of some money. And then you've got the other person down the other end that goes, my hands are magical. All you need is my massage. And so you've got these extremes, and you've got to find it somewhere in the middle. Just like everything, I reckon, in life, and I've said this before to people, like, I think we need the extremes, right? Okay, so like in politics, you probably need the far left and the far right, but the answer probably sits somewhere in the middle. And the same goes with training, with fitness, with physio. You know, you need the guys that are going to be vouching for evidence only. You probably need the guys that are still vouching for massage even though it doesn't have evidence. The answer, if you sort of probably combine these things in the middle, it's normally where the best things lie in everything, I reckon, anyway.
It's a very smart, rational call right there. Let me just calibrate so we're on the same page. Liver King. Is he in the middle?
I think he would be an extremist just a little bit. Just a little bit.
I can't help talking about that guy. At the moment.
Like, well, his marketing's working, right? Like,
I don't know if it's his. I think it's the brand that's behind. I think it's the
I
company.
definitely think it's whoever's pushing the money, and they're probably giving him a script. And I think all that like test and GHD is also helping.
Oh, bro. It's funny you mentioned the that thing about evidence-based. Just today popped up on my Instagram, Justin Lang.
Yeah.
And Justin has been on the show before. He and Nick, not that you two know each other, but you guys were both very instrumental in my recovery from the ACL Rico.
Yeah.
And he came on the show, I don't know, 50 episodes ago or something. No, it was episode 100.
There you go.
Yeah.
What are we on today?
166.
So I'm not a milestone
Yeah,
person.
brother. Yeah. We'll get you back on for 200, just say Phil. But he posted on Instagram today, and he was just doing, he was in his gym, and he was doing like sit-up variations, kind of V-up, sit-ups, holding a couple of light dumbbells and just like high rep stuff.
Yeah.
And the post was, and you know, it was just like volume work.
Yeah.
And his post was, I've been influenced by some great coaches over the years. 4 of those coaches, he mentioned a few names. One of them I recognize, who's a boxing coach.
Yeah.
And he's like, all of those coaches had a strong, like really believed in conditioning training. And he said, while the research does, or the literature doesn't necessarily support conditioning as being important, I know from experience that it's something that helps to build like a tough, resilient body. And I was like, that's really cool, because it's kind of speaking to that, where he's like,
100%.
No one says we got to do high rep, high volume work. Like, we talk about strength, we talk about sometimes range of motion, we talk about plyometric ability or maximum effort, but it's, and maybe muscular endurance, but it's like the conditioning thing is just like work capacity. And I just like that he was like, as science-based as he is, he's also like, I just know this shit works because we've done it in gyms and it makes tough people.
Yeah, I think you've got to have that like innate sense, and like especially like down because he's obviously a little bit more exercise phys / like high end sort of level, like back end of like the rehab training stuff. I know he does a lot of. You've got to pick up some like anecdotal evidence and like case study stuff and go, okay, that worked for that person. It might not work for everyone, but I've got to take that on board, right? If you only took on the literature and didn't take on like the person that you see, like you're missing out, right? Like it's too narrow-minded. You got to sort of be open to sort of taking out every little bit from life or work or whatever way you want to still think about it. I reckon. Like otherwise, I think you've been too narrow.
Tell me about your athletic past. I want to hear like about your athletic background, but then also tell me about the injuries. You mentioned 6 surgeries.
Yeah, something like that. Okay,
paint that picture for us.
Athletic background / lack thereof, like multi-sport growing up, like cricket, running, rugby, like grew up on 5 acres with an older brother. Like the whole time we were just outside kicking a footy, doing something essentially. So,
where?
Out at Kenthurst, which is out like sort of Dural, Windsor way. Most people don't know where Kenthurst is, but like probably now only about 50, 55 minutes from the city. When I was there, like probably like 90 minutes because like the M2 only came in whatever year. So like it just took a while to get from Sydney all the way out to sort of where we were. But yeah, grew up on like 5 acres. So like semi-rural, like part of our road was a dirt road for the first probably 5 to 7 years of my life. So like certainly not like country, but yeah, certainly different to city living. And then probably after school ended up played footy till I was about 27. That's when I started my own practice. It was just...
We're talking rugby union?
Rugby union. And then started my own practice at 27 and just too risky as a physio to keep working at my own practice where it's just me and my wife as like sort of the team. If I did my shoulder, had to get surgery, I can't work. So, I don't know too many people that want to be massaged by the physio with his feet. And if they do, they go into the wrong physio. But so, yeah, played rugby till I was about 27 in like, I guess you'd call it semi-professionally. So in Australia, there's obviously the Wallabies, then there's the Waratahs, then it's the level below that sort of what I got to. So which is called the Shoot Shield here, which has like Eastwood, Randwick, East Rugby, Sydney Uni for the people that live around here. So I played for Eastwood and yeah, I guess I was a winger. So I sort of tried to stay away from the trouble. I found trouble too many times. I broke my foot twice if we're going to go down the injury front. A weird little, well, technically it's not a broken foot. Technically it's a ligament, but I strained a ligament known as your Liz Frank ligament. It's basically a really important one in the middle of your foot and basically holds like the midfoot together, if that makes sense. We'll just go quick tangent. Named Liz Frank after Napoleon. So remember Napoleon many, many moons ago. His surgeon was named Liz Frank. And essentially he discovered that this ligament got broken quite often when someone got shot, hit, fell off a horse and their foot got caught in the stirrup and it snapped the ligament. And so the solution back in the day, chop off the front of your foot. So from front of your foot, just chop it off. That was the only solution because when it like goes, this ligament, essentially you lose all stability in your foot and it's going to become semi-obsolete. Like I couldn't do a calf raise, like physically couldn't do a calf raise when I broke this ligament because it was like just too hard and too painful. I just like physically couldn't. That was the solution back in the day.
And then you kind of just have a bit of a stump.
Yeah, you just have a stump and you just get on with life, People were tougher back in the days. So thankfully I wasn't around then. But yeah, did that twice and you can either get surgery if it's bad enough and that's like quite a long recovery. I was lucky enough it was just like a non-weight bearing boot for like 12 weeks both times, which is, you can imagine sort of the skinny leg I had afterwards. So that's... They were nasty injuries, but like at least no surgery at that stage. And these are all sort of spattered throughout, from being 18 to 27, I'd say. And then I ripped a tendon off my pinky finger, making a tackle. It deserves me right for using my hands rather than my shoulder. And so that was like one of my first surgeries. Had to get the tendon reattached because basically what happens when you rip the sort of what's called the flexor tendon is if you sort of remember how people like mock people when they're sipping a cup of tea and have their pinky pointed out, essentially my pinky would always stay up. So if I made a fist, my pinky would stay up. I physically couldn't pull it back down because the tendon had ripped off. So they go in there and reattach it. not too bad of a surgery, I guess, in the scheme of things.
Yeah.
My first injury would have been, first bad injury anyway. I fractured and dislocated my wrist. That was a bit of a nasty one. Basically tackling someone from behind, grabbed their pants, pulled them down. They fell back on my wrist and the bone lost in that battle.
Like that.
Yeah, so like the wrist cocked back. They fell on sort of your palm, I guess the best way to put it, if that sort of makes sense to people listening in. And then sort of the part of my wrist near my hand just snapped. So that was a nasty one. Nasty one as well because you could see it.
Yeah.
And I remember the physio at the time. I think I was studying at the time, but anyway, whether you're a physio or not, you sort of see what's happening. Like my arm was like physically deformed. Like you could see the snap in it. It didn't break the skin or anything like that. The physio came running out and they're obviously trying to calm you. I looked at it and I'm like, I'm in a fair bit of pain here. And they're like, don't worry, like it doesn't look that bad. And I remember just saying like, bullshit. Like I can actually see my wrist. Like it looks terrible. And anyway, so that was the wrist. I then broke my thumb. Again, needed surgery just in a bad place, unfortunately, for the break. Sometimes that happens. Like it's obviously you want to have your thumbs. I think that's what they say separates us from the apes. But that was just like in a bad place. Like again, it was at the back end of the season, so I didn't sort of miss too much time, but just missed the finals, which was annoying. But my biggest injury, which was another surgery, was I dislocated my kneecap, and on the way back in, it fractured the base of my femur, and then it also took away a little bit of the cartilage where the sort of femur is. And so with cartilage...
How the fuck does it fracture it comes back with that much force?
Yeah, so it came back with that much force.
And just fractured what, like part of the end of the very end?
Yeah, so like it sort of have like a knobbly bit, I guess, way to put it, and sort of fractured a little bit of that knobbly bit. And then what goes around the knobbly bit is like your cartilage, right? It's like kind of like a bit of your shock absorber there.
Yep.
And so...
I had chicken drumsticks for lunch.
100%. And so then it came off, but it was still attached. So like a bit of my my cartilage was still attached. And so with that injury, I got a scan. It's like, oh, this is what it is. And the solution was, let's see if it reattaches. Because once you lose your cartilage... they don't know how to grow it back. Hopefully in a couple of years they will be able to, and I'll have a new cartilage down there or something like that. But essentially they can't grow it back. So it's like you want to try to preserve it if you can. So I went into a straight-legged brace, which is super old school but needed to be done. No weight bearing for 8 weeks. And then, so wait and see. Basically approach, so you sort of stay off it for the 8 weeks. Get the scan after 8 weeks. They're like, oh, sorry, bro. It snapped off.
Fuck.
So then you go in there and I had to get surgery. Basically, they clean up the break and everything like that. They used to use a tactic called microfracture, which is where they drill into that cartilage area and they hope that promoted some cartilage growth. Didn't sort of really happen for me, but as a result of that surgery, it was another 8 weeks of non-weight bearing. Oh. So I end up with 16 weeks of like legitimately not putting my foot on the ground, you know, be it a sort of accident or something like that. And that was the biggest injury for me because 16 weeks, as you could imagine, not using something like your quad. My quad was the size of my wrist, essentially, by the end of it. And then that was the one that, going back, long story to the start of the pod, like that was the rehab that I didn't do that well because I just started my physio career, like things just fell to the wayside. It was at the end of the footy season, so it was the week before the grand final. I missed the grand final that we ended up winning, unfortunately. Again. But it is what it is. That's footy. And yeah, so then I had, like, as I said earlier on, like chronic problems from it.
So did you say that was the grand final you guys won?
So that was in 2014. So played all the year, missed the final game, basically, missed the grand final.
And the team won?
The team won. It was the first win since, actually it wasn't too many years. I think it was like 4 or 5 years, but it would have been a good win to be a part of. And you never feel a part of it, right? Like after the grand final, my brother actually, who also played with me in that team, he got injured 2 weeks before. So we both missed the grand final. And like, you know, you're in there and celebrating at the end and you just don't feel a part of it. Like even though you played all whatever, you know, 20 odd games beforehand, you just never get that sort of joy of winning the big day. Whereas conversely, the following year from that injury, I didn't play for the first 8 or 10 weeks. Come back in 2 weeks into it. I did one of those foot fractures that I was talking, one of those foot ligaments that I was talking about. So then another sort of 10 weeks off. So like, it was like 4 or 5 round games left. I'm coming back through third grade. I played like 2 games through third grade and then just so happened luck was on my side this time. Not so lucky for the other guys in first grade. The guy that took my spot last year when I sort of got injured, he ends up getting injured. And so I get booted in from thirds up into first grade for the final series. End up playing the final series. We end up winning again, so we went back to back. I only played 3 or 4 games in first grade maybe that year. I think maybe the first game and then the final 3 games, but felt more a part of winning that title even though I didn't play as much. But yeah, long story short, it was like long rehab on that one, but that was probably the worst. And that's my footy career pretty much. I did do another little stint in San Diego in America.
Oh yeah.
I think I want to say it's 2016 or 2015. Basically, my brother was a professional footy player. He got sort of scouted, for lack of a better word, to sort of help out with this club. It wasn't like a professional setup. My brother's older than me by 3.5 years, so he was finishing up his career anyway and everything like that. And they're like, hey, would you like to come over here, sort of like help out with like a little bit of the coaching, obviously be here and play and everything like that, and just help sort of develop the game. And he's like, yeah, that sounds sweet. Do you mind if I bring my brother? So I ended up sort of tagging along. I won't say it was because of anything I did, but yeah, spent sort of 6 months over in San Diego playing over there, which was really cool because like we'd fly up to San Francisco, across to Denver and stuff like that. So it was a really cool experience.
Cool.
Yeah, so that is the degree of my non-professional football career.
Which part of San Diego were you living in?
We're in Pacific Beach, which is like...
I lived in PB for a while.
There you go, laid back. There you go. I can't believe we've never talked that you lived in PB.
How funny. Yeah, I think I lived there for about 3 months.
Yeah, okay. Whereabouts in PB? Were you more towards Mission Beach or more in Pacific Beach?
I was right in Pacific Beach.
Yeah, okay.
So it's kind of all streets that come back off the beach, right?
Yeah.
All I can remember, I was about 4 blocks back from the beach.
Yeah.
And there was a park. There was a big sort of park with, I think it had a library in the middle of it.
Yeah, okay.
And I was a street back from that.
Yeah, okay.
And it was awesome stage of life.
Yeah, like,
what a cool part of town to live in.
Yeah, 100%. They're so laid back. Like you're walking around there like on a Wednesday and like there's so many people aged like 25 to like 40 that are like walking around. You're like, what is everyone doing with their life?
Drinking beers, hanging out in the sun.
100%.
Yeah, I felt like there. I mean, you obviously view it through a different lens because you're overseas and stuff.
Yeah.
But I felt like that was because in San Diego I met a lot of people who were from other parts of America.
Yeah.
Met other, people from other countries too, but there's like a lot of, I'm from Chicago or whatever, but me and my buddies moved here because fuck, how good's the lifestyle sort of thing. And I felt like the culture there was what people in Bondi and stuff want to have.
Yeah.
Like I lived in Bondi for a long time and it was awesome. But it's kind of laid back, but not really.
Yeah.
Like everyone's pretty fucking stressed out because it's still big city.
Yeah.
Everyone's chasing
still
the dollar.
Of people, right?
Yeah, like and it's like fucking heavy traffic and all that. Whereas in like San Diego, I remember you would be walking past someone's house on a weekday and they might be having a barbecue and some beers and they'll be like, hey man, what's going on? Like come and have a beer kind of thing. And you'd cruise out and they'd be like, hey man, what's up? I live up the road. Oh, cool man, welcome. Hey, where's that accent from?
Yeah,
like,
as soon as the accent, I was about to say that. As soon as the accent comes out, it's like doors open up.
Yeah, but you're like that, like just that, like people being that open and relaxed.
Yeah.
You don't find that in Sydney.
Nah, no way. Like that was like such a different lifestyle. And I reckon you hit the nail on the head. It's what sort of like Bondi wants to be, but it's just too big of a city and too many people there now. Whereas Pacific Beach is still small. If you go into actual San Diego, it's like it starts to get more hectic and everything like that. But Pacific / Mission, because we're right on the borderline of Mission Beach. They're essentially the same place,
Yep.
But it was certainly like a laid back different lifestyle. And I wasn't working at the time as well, so we sort of got all the benefits of like not working as well. Like we were the laziest people in the world for 6 months.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a good 6 months, that's for sure.
So that footy career then, what did you say, 18 to 27?
Yeah, 18 and 27
Ish.
outside of school, let's say. Like, you're obviously playing, like, I think I started when I was like 8 or something like that.
So were you almost dealing with kind of one major injury every year? Is that kind of how it worked out?
I sort of just like hit a bit of bad luck. Like I had a couple of like hammy issues when I was younger, and like a bit of a back issue from being a fast bowler in cricket, which now looking back on it, it's like, oh, the hammy and the back are probably related. At the time, physios were treating them totally separately. But yeah, I think like from about 18 to 27, I wouldn't say every year, but like a fair chunk of the years I was picking up like a break or something like that, a little bit of bad luck. And I think sometimes it just comes down to bad luck. You know, you hear these players in professional sport that was like, that guy's injury prone. I think there's some sort of, I'm sure in 100 years' time, we'll be able to realize, oh, that person was missing, DNA strand number 152. That's why he kept tearing his ACL. Like, no matter how much like rehab he did, he's going to tear his ACL. Like, there's definitely, and like I use the ACL as an example because there's a couple of like rugby league players. I think his name was Tatu Morgan. He might still be playing, but like he was like the next big thing, outside back, big Polynesian sort of like centre, and like ACL when he's 18, and then like does all the rehab. ACL again when he was like, I don't know the exact age, but let's say he was 20 or something, and ACL again, like went through like 3 or 4 ACLs. I had a guy I played footy with that like played Australian schoolboys and everything like that, went through the same thing, like did his ACL like 3 times, and like he was diligent with his rehab too, right? So it wasn't like, I don't want to say it wasn't his fault. It wasn't his fault. Like he tried his best, but I think there'll be a time where you realize, oh, these injury prone people, yes, they are unlucky, but there's also, they're missing something, so to speak, if that makes sense.
It does. I think,
that's what happened.
I can't remember where I heard the story, if it was a Justin Langtail or a Clint Hill, but it was some footballer who, had like played a fucking bunch and then was walking out onto the pitch for a training session and stepped and tore his Achilles as he stepped. And then naturally stepped onto his other leg and tore that Achilles.
Well, that's a good one.
It was like right leg, left leg. And he was like, and then and they're like, how do you explain that?
Yeah.
Like, you could argue, maybe he tore it kind of most of the way in a training session the day before and it was hanging on by a thread, but it's like not on both legs.
Yeah.
Like, and that, it just, and there was no force, there's no pressure. It's almost like it's a neurological fuck out. Or so,
you just don't know, right? Like, and I think that's the thing. We always want to have answers, but we don't know for that. On that sort of like double tear thing, I guess this won't make me a closet fan anymore, but I'm a closet wrestling fan, like WWE wrestling fan. So the opposite of what you're sort of talking about.
Are you?
Yeah.
Amazing.
And so if you want to watch a good like clip on someone doing that, Vince McMahon, who was like the owner of...
the big guy that was wearing the suit.
Yeah, 100%. So like, he's a billionaire. There's like he was doing like, there was this pay-per-view and he runs down the ramp and supposed to get into the ring. On the way running down the ramp, tears his quad tendon. Now, this guy was 60 odd, let's say 50 odd, and like had clearly been juicing.
He's a huge guy.
Okay, so too big for me to be natural. Anyway, tears his quad, sort of semi stumbles, gets in the ring, like slides into the ring, goes to stand up, tears his other quad. So it's a great film clip of like seeing someone just tear his quad, get up, stand up, tear his quad, and then he's just like sitting on his backside, unable to stand because both his quad tendons are like torn. But the show must go on, right?
Still
in these
doing
sort of
the
things. So like he's got the microphone and he's sort of like cutting what they call a promo, like, speaking out like as if nothing happened, and they sort of like drag him off the stage, right? So to speak. So that's a good image.
Man. Tell me, what is it that attracts you to that style of wrestling?
I reckon, like, we grew up with it as kids, so it's definitely like somewhat of a nostalgia thing. I reckon go back to when we were, 5 or 6, and you're seeing like the Hulk Hogans of the world, the bigger than, larger than life characters. They're 6'6", so 2 meters, 300 pounds, so 140 kilos. They're just like larger than life, and they're like huge jack dudes, and you're like, I want to be that guy. Yeah. I'm gonna say my prayers, eat my vitamins, and do my weights. I'm sure that's all Hulk's doing. He's not doing anything else, is he?
No, yeah.
So I think you just get like attracted to. I think that's what stood out originally, and then like nowadays, why I watch it, I don't know. It's just like what I like. I don't mind doing it. It's like an escape. It's like a soap opera, right? Like, at no stage do I think the current day wrestlers, whoever they may be. Let's use John Cena as like a well-known example. Like, he's not going into the UFC and winning a fight. Like, I've got no...
Brock Lesnar did it.
Yeah, he's an exception to the rule, right? CM Punk did the exact opposite and went 2-2, right? Yeah. But, yeah, like, he's a definite exception to the rule. So most of them, they're just great athletes, right?
Yeah.
And so I think I like
physical
watching
specimens.
I like watching that. But I reckon what originally attracted me is the fact they were physical specimens, and, like, I want to be like him.
Yeah, okay.
And you probably don't realize that, like, back then, like, the storylines are actually what sort of makes you sort of really sort of keep engaged into it back then.
Yeah.
And then nowadays, I don't watch it every weekend. I watch, like, the big events and stuff like that. And now it's more of, like, nearly watching, like, a gymnastic performance to a certain degree. You watch the matches and you're just like, oh, my God, that guy just did a 450 splash, like as in like rotated 450 degrees. It's like that guy is hell athletic and stuff like that. So
Yeah, right.
I'm probably not as into the storylines just because I don't keep up with it as much anymore. But I reckon it was like the sport access aspect, I should say. And yeah, that's probably why I started doing weights, in all honesty. Me and my brother, like, you know, watching them, it's like, I want to be like that guy. Like I want to bench that weight, so to speak. I want those big pecs.
Have you seen the documentary? Is it Bigger, Faster, Stronger?
Yeah, definitely. It's a while ago though. So
they talk. I think because it's one
of the brothers was
one of the Bell brothers.
Yeah, I don't think it was Smelly.
Smelly Mark.
Smelly's Mark.
Okay,
and he wasn't the wrestler. One of the other brothers.
His little chubby one.
Yeah.
But I remember, he was. A lot of the premise of that was like, when I grew up, we loved Hulk Hogan and we idolized him, and it was, that was kind of the premise of like, we idolized the big pecs and the six pack.
Yeah.
100%. And then when we were adults, we found out it's because they're all juicing.
100%.
But all that aside, okay, when you put it, I've never understood it.
Yeah.
But when you put it in that way, I can totally understand it. I see, I'm a big UFC fan, and MMA in general, and it's very much a similar thing. The nature of the sport is different, but a lot of what's entertaining about it is these backstories of the fighters and the prep and all that, and it's just a story. So in the case of MMA, it's generally not fictional.
Yeah.
But WWE it is, but it almost doesn't matter, right? It's just entertainment.
There's a reason why Conor McGregor is the highest seller, and it's like in terms of pay-per-views. It's not because he is the prettiest fighter or the best fighter in the world at the moment. Far be from it, right? Like, his time as sort of being the top contender is probably unfortunately done for him. But like, he's still selling pay-per-views because he gets some emotion out of you, right? Because he's entertaining, right? And like, whether you're on that bandwagon of, most of the Irish people that are absolutely loving him and following him no matter what he does, or, you're sick of his sort of more recent escapades and you're like, I want to see that guy and to get knocked out, you buy the pay-per-view to watch that, right? Like, and so that's what sort of like wrestling is. You watch it because you want to see that guy lose, even though you know it's fake, right?
Yeah.
you know eventually the bad guy's going to lose. There's rarely a story in wrestling where the bad guy doesn't lose at the end of it. Just
is
like
that
a
right?
movie. Like,
it kind of gives you what you want most of the time.
At some stage it's got to, right?
Yeah.
But like, I think it's personalities sell in wrestling and personalities sell in the UFC too, right? And that's why I like watching the UFC too. Like, I don't really watch every card, but I'll watch the cards when there's someone that's a personality or someone that's like sort of like transcending the sport. Like I watched the Nunez fight like the other week, right? Like because she is like such an animal, and it's not necessarily her personality, but it's the fact that she was been so unbeatable, then lost. I didn't watch her losing because I was like, she's going to win.
Yeah, she'll come back.
And then,
you thought she'd walk over.
Yeah. And then when she came back, obviously, and like hellacious fight, the recent one.
You see that look she gets in her eyes?
Yeah, she's scary.
It's like she loves to fight.
Yeah, she's like she
it's
wants
like
to be a lioness,
Glee.
right? Like she identifies as that, right?
Yeah, it's this fucking scary expression.
Yeah, 100%.
She's just like stalking Pena.
Yeah.
And I mean, Pena did pretty good in that second fight, but I think she was exposed as just not being as equipped as what Nunez is.
Yeah, 100%. Like, and I don't know the nuances because I'm not in sort of like combat sport as much, but you can sort of also see those sort of things, I reckon, a lot of the time. Like if you watch it enough, you sort of just go, yeah, she's just the step behind at this sort of stage, right?
Pena's a real awkward mover.
Yeah.
Like her punches, her kicks, it all looks very
that
stiff.
sometimes works, right, for some people. Like sometimes you see those like people that like have weird and wonderful styles, and then because they're so weird and wonderful, they end up sort of being good.
It's true.
Because in like all sort of like sports to a certain degree, like go Australian hearing like with cricket, like there's like Steve Smith and Marcus Lambouche at the moment, like who have the weirdest batting style that no one would ever technically tell, but they've got this like weird quirky setup, but they benefit from it because I think whether it puts them off or it's just their like sort of way that they've developed their game and they understand how they move and stuff like that as a result. Sometimes the awkward styles work, right?
Yeah, okay. Unconventional.
Yeah. And I think there should be an element like to go back onto sort of how we sort of started the conversation on like training people with that. Like you don't have to be 100% like symmetrical. Like sure, you don't want to squat and like move your hips all the way to the left or something like that. But if you've got some like little quirky thing that you've been doing for 20 years, probably not the reason for your knee pain because you've been doing it every sort of time. And I think sometimes to go roundabout on physio on it, like we sometimes pigeonhole and training people in general, like we pigeonhole like you have to do things this way. The reality is like the human body is so adaptable, right? You get used to doing things differently. I'm sure the way you practice jiu-jitsu, right? Like you're not always like
lopsided.
Yeah, 100%, right? Like you go to a dominant side into dominant moves, right? Like there's no 100% right way and wrong way to do things. There's definitely like unsafe ways, but in sort of training, there's like unsafe ways, and then there's like what you're used to, and like probably the way you should do it within reason. And then for sport, I reckon there's who knows what will happen if you sort of got a bit of a weird style. Again, as long as it's not too counterproductive, as long as like UFC, sort of thinking about it in UFC terms, as long as it's not forcing you to expend too much extra energy that's going to cost you later on in the fight, maybe your weird style will help people, right?
Tell me about you mentioned before that the slipped disc is bullshit.
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Like, I want to pick a couple of terms here.
Yeah, I reckon like that came about from like sometimes it's just easier to try to explain things in layman's terms to say something like that to someone, like, because everyone understands it, right? So like the easy out, instead of saying, hey, your disc is like bulging a little bit, what that ultimately means, and go into like a long explanation, you just go, you've got a slipped disc, and the person goes, I know what a slipped disc is. I always hear about that.
Out.
Yeah, it's slipped out. And it's like, the reality, if your disc is slipped out, you're probably in a wheelchair. So, it just doesn't happen. But, and then what we've sort of found as physio, and they've done studies on this about like back pain and stuff like that, the terminology is actually really important, because if you hear that you've got a slipped disc, you think my back's stuffed, like it's gone.
Death sentence.
Yeah, 100% a death sentence. Whereas the reality is that back pain's probably like multifactorial. Yeah, maybe having a small disc bulge is adding to that, but maybe it's also the fact that your left hip's really tight or your hamstrings are super tight as well. So it's rarely, unless you've got a disc that's like pushing on a nerve really strongly, it's rarely going to be just one sort of factor in most cases, not all cases, of course. So I think it's easy for you to say a slip disc because then they understand it. The reality is it's a lot more complicated, if that makes sense. So I think it's just an easy out that people use rather than malice. But what I did want to say, which I took off topic, like they did a study on it and they found out that actually your verbiage is really important. And so instead of saying you've got a slip disc, if it's like a multifactorial thing, you should actually say you've got non-specific lower back pain, which some people laugh at, right? Like, what do you mean? Like non-specific lower back pain? Give me an actual diagnosis. I want to identify with my injury, essentially. Yeah. But the reality is...
I'm not going to let you attach it to this visual thing.
Yeah, exactly. Saying you've got non-specific lower back pain, you go, listen, you're essentially saying to them, you've got a little bit of back pain. There's tons of things you've got to work on, and it might make them go, oh, okay, so my back isn't that bad. All right? So
that's interesting.
A lot of the time with something like a back pain, right? Like someone will come in with me with a scan and they've got like a disc bulge. And quite often in like disc bulge terms, it will say like mild, moderate, or severe. So let's say mild's the bottom 33%, the next one's the next 33%, and severe is like top 33%. If it's severe, yeah, you're probably dealing with something that's really disc related. If it's mild, I reckon if we scanned your back, if we scan my back, we're going to have disc bulges. It's like a ridiculous stat. I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's like 30% of 30-year-olds have a disc bulge or something like that. So like it's so common, and we used to think it was not a normal part of aging, but I think the reality is it's a normal part of aging. And also we've realized these disc bulge and then they unbulge. So I get my scan today, got a disc bulge. They don't unbulge and bulge like overnight, so to speak, but like doing some good rehab, 9 months later, I might get a scan, not bulged at all.
Right.
So like labeling people with a slip disc might then for the next 10 years, they identify that, and they're the people that I see like, oh, I saw another physio the other, when this first happened, and I've got a slip disc. It's like, you had a disc bulge probably, but you might not have a disc bulge anymore. And it's like, I think it's like really powerful the words are really powerful, I should say. Yeah.
That seems really important to me too. And it's not something that we're particularly cognizant of, but like when you get someone who comes in, and this is going to be the next one I want to ask you about, but people be like, oh, I've got like inactive glutes or something like that. And you're like, what do you like, where'd you hear that? And they're like, oh, like a physio told me years ago. And it'll be like, squeeze your glutes for me. And then they squeeze and you're like, man, your glutes feel like pretty strong. Like, I can feel the muscle contract. I don't know. But they're like, man, that person's been carrying that narrative or that label since the physio said you got inactive glutes.
100%.
Tell me about that. Is that bullshit?
I reckon I see that at least once a week, if not like a lot more. That like someone will come in, it's also really common with knee pain. They'll be like, it's because my glutes don't fire. It's like, And you can't be like rude, and you've got to delicately approach the subject, because you can't go, that's just ridiculous.
You a fucking idiot.
Yeah. Like your glutes don't fire. Like you wouldn't be able to walk. Like if your glutes didn't work, you could not stand up, right? Like it'd be impossible. Like you'd have no base of support to a certain degree. But I think sometimes that comes from, I guess, a product of the times, because I think like, and it happens in fitness in general, right? People get like etched into something, and they like the newest thing is doing X, you know? I'm trying to think of the glutes is the best example of it, where like, I reckon it was probably 15, 20 years ago, might have even been longer than that before that, okay? I was not obviously in the game at that sort of stage, that like this became the thing to say that your glutes don't fire, and it could be the answer to your back pain, and it could be the answer to your knee pain, because like anecdotally, you're saying if you strengthened your glutes, like some of that stuff went away, which is definitely true, but it's not that they're not firing, right? If they're not firing, as you said, like you wouldn't be able to squeeze your butt cheeks together.
Yeah.
But I reckon that they say that because, again, it's another thing for the patient easily to identify. If you say your glutes don't fire, then they go, I've just got to work on my glutes. And you essentially achieve your goal as a physio because you get them to work on your glutes, but you don't realize the effect that maybe might have 10 years down the track. When their knee pain comes back, it's like, oh, it's my glutes that haven't been fired for the whole 10 years. It's like, no, your knee pain's back because you just started running for the first time in 10 years again, if that sort of makes sense.
It does.
Yeah, I definitely, but again, to go back to where I was saying, like, you've got to be delicate on it, right? Because you can't, like, go, that's just absolutely ridiculous. And they might actually have really liked their physio or their PT, whoever told them that, right? And they've just not seeing them anymore because of life. They've changed where they live or something like that. And if you sort of say that they've been, like, seeing you, right? And you said this, right? Joey's gone crazy on the glutes don't fire stuff, but that person really like bonded with you and like they believed everything you said. If I then, as the next person that treats them, come in and goes, no, Joey's an idiot, that doesn't work, they're going to believe Joey because I've only known them for 15 minutes, right? And they're going to go, well, this guy doesn't know anything. Joey last time said my glutes didn't fire, and then my knee pain went away, and now just because lifestyle's changed, I'm not with Joey anymore, and so I don't get to work on my glutes as much. He must have been right. Like this new physio is just
Joey told me to get a divorce. I got a divorce.
Yeah,
my life is
exactly.
Joey knows what's up. Yeah, okay.
So you've got to be delicate on it, because if you sort of just like push them to the side and say like, you know, that's stupid, this is what you need to do, they're not going to buy in. And if you don't get the buy-in, then you're not going to fix them. And ultimately we should want to fix them.
So you got to be diplomatic in that circumstance.
Yeah, and you sort of slowly get it into it.
I could see what they were getting at.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He might have just said that because, I guess when you stand on a single leg, like you sort of have a tendency to lean in or whatever it may be, that sort of like that you can sort of rationale why they sort of said that. But you sort of, go like definitely can strengthen it. And that goes back to that sort of calf raise story about that guy saying, you could do 30 calf raises. Can I keep working on them, or is the job done? Same with your glutes, right? Like, if you get stronger glutes, it's going to be a better base of support for your back. Like, I don't think there'd be any evidence to suggest if you got a stronger bum, your back or your knee won't feel better. Like, it should just naturally feel better, right? So
I like when someone presents to me a piece of information from their previous trainer or from their doctor or something that I find questionable like that.
Yeah.
My question before I comment on it will be, how do you like that, like physio? What do you think of them? And if they're like, oh, I don't know him, my friend, and I'll be like, he's a shit cunt.
Yeah, 100%, you can do that.
But if they're like, oh, he's great, like, I've been seeing him for years, I'll be like, okay, cool. Well, hey, maybe we could look at it in a different light.
100% what I do, right? Like 100% what I do. You have to do it like that, right?
Yeah.
Because again, whether it's a PT or physio, you need buy-in. You need them to trust you, and you need them... you need them to come back if you're actually going to make a change for most times, unless they're going on and doing a program by themselves. But then they still need the buy-in to keep up with the program, because if they don't buy in, they'll pay for your program and then just not do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right. So
crappy term.
So, okay.
So label it crappy term as well.
Crappy term. What about this one? This is one I got when I was like, I was pretty young. I must maybe 18 or 19. And I can't remember why. I had a couple of hernia operations when I was around that age.
Sort of sports, sort of like hernia?
Nah, I worked in a fish shop, like a seafood store for like 3 years, and we used to lift big. Yeah, okay. And I was pretty. I was skinny I was skinny until I was about 30.
Yeah, okay.
And so I'd lift these heavy tubs full of ice and shit.
Yeah.
And I think I just tore it, like opened up in groinal hernia doing that. And then I had it fixed, and then it came back, and then I had to get it done again. But I remember seeing a physio and he was like, oh, let me do some tests on your core. And he was like trying to get me to activate deeper levels of my core.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, your core, like your deeper levels of your core aren't working, like your super. And I was like, shit. And he's like, I run this special class. It's this thing that I do 2 nights a week. It's here it's like 100. And I was like, oh, I can't afford that. And I was like, no, but I went away from years and I'm like, man, I got like a dysfunctional core. My core's fucked.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I haven't thought about it for a long time, but it just popped up while we were chatting today. And I'm like, I think I got a pretty strong core.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Is there truth in that?
Let me ask you this first to go back at you. What do you think of that physio? Are you friends with him?
Shit cunt.
Yeah. Well, that would be the answer. Like, now they've done tons of like studies on that as well. Like, and basically we can't, there's even a study that basically says we can't even palpate what we think we're palpating. And by palpate, I mean, touch a muscle we think we're touching a lot of the times. Like, and I'm talking the more superficial muscles.
Because you can't access it?
No, more that you think you're touching the right spot and like it's the wrong spot. Okay.
Right.
And these are for like the smaller muscles we're talking about. Like, I'm not talking about your quad. As a physio, if you don't know what quad you're touching, then you've got an issue there. But like the really sort of small muscles. So to say a muscle like your transverse abdominis, which I'm assuming he's talking about, which is essentially for the players at home, like the muscle that attaches onto your spine and is really deep. It is a couple of layers of muscle deep. So I'm not touching it.
Right.
Put it that way is the quick answer to that. So no, we can't sort of assess whether your deep core is switching on. In saying that, if you get an ultrasound, you can see whether it's switching on for sure. So my wife's sort of moving into women's health physio, like pre and postnatal sort of stuff. So we've just like recently bought an ultrasound. It's not a ultrasound like you might have gone to an old physio where they ultrasound you, like they wave this like wand over you that's like a bit hot and they say it's like breaking down muscle adhesions, which coincidentally all been disproven. This is like an ultrasound that basically you can see the muscles moving. So you rub it over there. If anyone's ever had a kid, they use an ultrasound to basically see like where the baby is and everything like that. So it's essentially the same thing as that.
Okay.
And so she can place that on your stomach. You got a screen onto our computer, like it relays to the computer, and then you can say switch on your abs, and you can actually see the different layers of muscles and as they switch on. So that's the way, if you're going to be serious about it, if it's going to actually tell you if you're switching on those deep abs. So magic hands are not a thing, as much as I like to say I've got magic hands.
Yeah, right. So maybe a bit of
creative license.
Bit of bullshit there. Yeah, okay, fair. Less on that kind of, and this couple sort of coming to the end here, I wanted to just throw a couple of rapid fire, yay or nay sort of thing. Anti-inflammatories.
Yeah.
Here's the thing. Personally, certain circumstances when I'm getting pain from an injury, I can have anti-inflams and I can sleep and then like it helps.
Yeah.
It helps generally. Like I don't live on them, but there's been time, particularly like with my post-surgery, they give you some really strong ones and I'm like, man, those things fucking saved me plenty of times during that. But then we also know that the inflammation process is the healing process and it's important. So then there's people like, no, never fuck with anti-inflammatories because you're just cutting that process short. Yeah. Talk to me about that.
So anti-inflammatories on like big, like gross injuries, I reckon are like really good. So like, and timing is also really important. So say ACL surgery, right? Like you've got a huge knee, right? Like you've just had someone drill into your knee, cut a piece of your hamstring or patella tendon, stick it in a place that doesn't belong. So your knee is huge. At that stage, we need to manage the swelling, right? Like no one in their right mind is going to say like, you should just let the swelling be. All right. You've got to get it out because the swelling is blood coming into the area. And so what we want to do is we want to get the blood out of there and get the blood back in there. So we don't want to get rid of we do want to get rid of the swelling, obviously, eventually.
And it's going to go back, like,
it's going to move in and out, right? Yeah. So, like, I think in that sort of stage, like, anti-inflammatories is going to help with that because they'll get rid of some of the inflammation, then the inflammation will come back. And you sort of want to wash it out because, like, the blood brings in the good stuff, takes away the bad stuff. Okay. So you need that to sort of happen in those really big gross injuries. If you just have a really big swollen knee for much longer, it means you're not going to be able to straighten it, which is super important, as you'd know, in an ACL rehab. And so like there is probably some benefits from doing it. In like a lower back pain sort of patient, some people like find great relief in it. So I often say to people, if it's not going to do harm, which it's not going to do, if you get a sore back like you just did, you're 50 years old, you don't have to be 50, I guess, did tons of gardening and your back's just feeling like, geez, it's just a little bit jacked up. You take an anti-inflammatory, makes you feel better, happy days. Whether it's purely physiological, like the anti-inflammatory working, or whether it's psychological, you just go and I had a tablet and now I feel better.
Yep.
Who knows if it makes you feel better. So often when people ask me like whether they should do something, and it might be something like a trigger ball or a trigger ball exercise or a stretch, and they go like, can I do this? The answer is, does it make you feel better? Yeah, it does. And then in my head, I'm thinking, is this counterproductive? Is this actually going to make you feel worse? Like, is this like bad for you? And if the answer is no, then I say, go do it. Like, if it makes you feel better, we've got to let people make themselves feel better, right? So in that sort of like back pain in that situation, I think it'd be, again, totally fine, right? It makes the person feel better. So who am I to say, don't take the tablet and feel worse?
Surely there's an upper limit to that where it's like, don't pump them every day.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what you sort of say to them too. And like, especially with anti-inflammatories, watch out for like stuff because it can affect people's guts. So have it with food, little things like that. And then in terms of like, say, an acute ankle sprain though, they've actually, again, done some study on that and found that you shouldn't probably have it in the first 48 to 72 hours because it will affect that healing process that you need some inflammation.
Right.
So the original thing, and like a hemi tear being something similar, like say if you tear your hemi, don't take the anti-inflammatory straight away because you need that healing process straight away. But then if you maybe need it to help with like a little bit of pain relief because, taking away some inflammation will inevitably or quite often take away some pain, then you can sort of take it at that stage because at that stage, it's probably not delaying your healing. Whereas if you take it 2 minutes for the next, 24 hours after the injury, it might actually delay your healing. And like, we're not talking that you're never going to heal, but the whole idea of physio is we want you to heal quicker, right? Like my job as a physio is not to heal you. Your body's going to heal itself. My job is to guide you either with massage, exercises, advice to make that process instead of 6 weeks, 5 weeks, hopefully, or something like that. So that's where we'd sort of give some advice around that. So anti-inflammatories, yes or no, depending on the situation, might be the answer to that one.
Fair. Ice.
Ice is a good one, right?
We've all used ice, right? Like it's always been a thing.
Yeah.
But then now there's like, the guy that came out with the icing and he's like, I fucked it all up.
Yeah.
Same thing, gets rid of the healing process.
Yeah.
Where does that stand?
I reckon it sits on the same thing as the anti-inflammatory, right? Because the whole idea of ice is it's slowing down the, you're not letting it inflame, you're not letting blood come to the area and sort of do its thing, clear out the debris, take it all away.
Yeah.
So if you're just like only icing, keeping it really still, maybe it will slow it down. But then you you look at things like Wim Hof and all the other stuff, and you got the extremists again, right? Like, and they're
the
saying
Liver King of the ice.
Yeah, exactly. He's gonna cure everything being in ice baths. And again, I think it comes down to like a little bit of common sense. Like, if you're icing something that's like not really swollen, it's not really causing you much pain. It's like, why are you icing it? Like, it's probably not even doing anything if you are. But again, at the same time, if you've just rolled your ankle and you're in so much agony and you just put a bit of ice on there and it just like numbs it a little bit, it makes you feel better, and you're not an elite athlete trying to get back on the park, like why wouldn't you do something that makes you feel better? Like,
and that's an analgesic effect.
Yeah,
then?
exactly.
Like reduces pain.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes that's all people want, right? Like they're not concerned about being able to run a marathon. They just want like their ankle to feel better, like at this very moment, if that makes sense. But I think there's obviously evidence still out on it all, right? Like, as you said, like the guy's coming out, it's not the thing to do. Yet you see a footy player on the weekend that just rolled his ankle covered in ice, right?
Yeah.
Like as he's sort of exiting.
And I used a bunch of ice after surgery and it was saving me on a daily basis.
That's what I mean. So I think, again, like if we go back to passing the pub test, like I think if it passed the pub test and you go, that's not going to cause Joey like any like long-term damage, but it's giving him some short-term relief, 100% to it. If it helps get rid of that inflammation and then you do your physio exercises, your heel slides, your knee extensions or whatever they are, and then it swells back up again. Hey, maybe that's the good blood coming in there and taking it back out afterwards and then you ice it again. So I think the key for most injuries that have like a big load of inflammation, which is where you're going to use either ice or anti-inflammatories, is you nearly want to see that ebb and flow of like bigger, small, because it's like bringing the good stuff in, taking the bad stuff out. As long as when it's getting bigger, it's not because you're hurting it every time you're doing your exercises or something like that.
Yep.
So I still ice if I rolled my ankle and like it was like huge, I'd still ice it and then I just keep it moving afterwards and that's where I sort of sit on it. So
it's good. It's a very rational, moderate opinion there,
I
Nick.
think that's it, right? Like as I said, like somewhere in the middle is normally the answer.
I like it. Mate, I appreciate this conversation we had today.
Yeah, it's been good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot more I'd like to go into. I thought it'd be cool to chat on like common injuries and like common mistakes that you see kind of mechanically and stuff, but we can save that for another day.
Yeah, a milestone episode.
Yeah, that's right, bro. 200, book it in. I'll bring the coffee. Where can people find you? Tell us, like, plug your business, plug your Instagram and stuff. So if they want to get in touch, they can find you.
Yeah, so we're located out of Maroubra. Like, being a physio, like, you can always obviously contact us if you're, not in the area too, but like most people that see us obviously are in and around the area. So we're in Maroubra, in Sydney, Active RX Physio. So just like the word active and then RX and then physio, all one word is the Instagram handle. And yeah, I guess like if you follow that or you pop onto the Facebook, you can always get in contact with us there. It's just activerxphysio.com.au if you sort of want to go on the website, check us out, want to book an appointment, it's all on there.
Right, awesome.
Too easy.
And fam, I mean, I don't know how many people I've told to come and see you over the years, but I vouch for you.
Yeah, you do vouch. We cut from the same cloth.
My guy.
Yeah, I love it.
Thanks, bro.
Too easy, my man. Pleasure.
Fam, guys, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend, pass it on, particularly someone who might be injured or seems to be injured all the time. They could probably benefit from hearing that chat. We'll see you next week. Cheers.